There are many legitimate complaints to offer regarding the current state of the video game medium, but I think it's important to not lose sight of how miraculous things are as well. Even if many modern games are produced through unethical means, are released in an unfinished state, or gouge their consumer base through predatory microtransactions, there are still hundreds of immaculate, consumer-friendly games available to us, and we will never be able to finish them all in our lifetime. Remembering this fact keeps me from feeling too pessimistic and depressed when I read gaming news. That said, there is one element of modern game design that has generated an unassuageable worry, and that is the lack of progressive gameplay mechanics. To me, it seems like most modern mainstream games rely on evolving pre-established formulas, and I fear that without new, innovative mechanics, the artistic aspect of games won't reach its full potential. Take Elden Ring, for example. Great game. It was my, and obviously many other people's, game of the year last year. But let's be honest, the core formula of that game is something we've seen repeated since Demon's Souls back in 2009. Sure, it's evolved in a very positive way, but at root, it is still mostly the same. Now contrast Elden Ring with beloved games that introduced original formulas. Portal, Shadow of the Colossus, Metal Gear Solid 1 with its cinematic style. Hell, even Wii Sports had an original approach. While there are modern games that provide new formulas, they aren't always well received or financially successful, and thus do not become mainstream. Add this on top of the fact that video games are so expensive and take so much time to make, which makes investors less likely to give their money to risk-taking video game auteurs, unless your name is Hideo Kojima, or Ken Levine, or someone like that. Though we have hundreds of great games available to us, I do wish that the modern gaming landscape could in some way mirror the late 90s, early 2000s era, when experimental games were produced alongside the high-profile ones. Allow me to provide today's example. Back in 2001, Konami released two high-profile games for the PS2, Metal Gear Solid 2, my all-time favorite game, and Silent Hill 2, arguably the greatest horror game ever made. That same year, Konami released an experimental title on the PS2 called Shadow of Destiny, aka Shadow of Memories for those in Europe. I will be honest, I never heard of this game until recently. Several of my viewers asked that I check it out because the game features references to alchemy, a subject that I've garnered some notoriety for discussing as of late. Yes, the game's use of alchemy is very smart, and I will explain why in a few minutes. But that's not the experimental element I'm insinuating. Rather, it has to do with the game's use of time travel, and how it interweaves with both story and gameplay. Granted, time travel is not a unique concept when it comes to games, but its implementation in Shadow of Destiny is very much unique. I will go into greater detail in a few minutes, but before I do, I will provide a spoiler-free synopsis. The story of Shadow of Destiny centers on a man named Ike Kush, who low-key looks like James from Silent Hill 2 if he modeled for Vogue, with Raiden's haircut.
This is my real hair, okay?
During the game's opening credit sequence, an unknown assailant sneaks up behind Ike and stabs him to death for some unknown reason. Instead of passing on to the afterlife, an unseen supernatural being brings Ike's soul to the realm of Limbo. Upon waking up in Limbo, he hears the voice of Mario speak to him. No, really. Charles Martinet, the voice of Mario, is in this game, and the character he voices is what I can best describe as the exact opposite of Mario, but we'll get to them later. This character offers to bring Ike back to life minutes before he is attacked, so he may change his fate. It is insinuated that there is an ulterior motive to this offer, but because none can be deduced, Ike accepts the offer. Upon returning to life, Ike comes to the realization that looking over his shoulder and legging it when he sees the killer would make too much sense. Instead, he goes to an area full of potential witnesses. Thankfully, This discourages the killer, but the malevolence doesn't end there. For the rest of the game, Ike is tasked with either preventing his death again, or preventing certain disasters from happening around the town. In order to do this, he must use a time-traveling device known as a digipad, given to him by the mysterious being we first met in Limbo. Sometimes, we prevent disaster by going back in time a few minutes, but other times we will need to go back in time to the 1500s to stop something terrible from happening. I will give a spoiler-free hypothetical to explain what I mean. Let's say that the killer shot you with a gun. Stopping the killer, going by this game's logic, requires you to travel back hundreds of years to the time when the first gunsmith existed and convince him that guns are evil. Going back to the future, the killer would not have a gun to use. Now, that doesn't happen in this game, but that hypothetical example gives you an idea of the type of gameplay that you can expect. Yes, the puzzle solutions are somewhat ridiculous, reminiscent of Silent Hill 2's use of juice to dislodge a garbage chute in order to obtain a key item. Thankfully, the ridiculousness doesn't provoke frustration and largely adds to the game's charm. Now, before I expand upon the gameplay further, I need to acknowledge a big-ass elephant in the room. I did say that this type of gameplay was experimental. That said, there is a little game, I don't know, that some of you might have heard of called Chrono Trigger, that released 6 years before Shadow and used the same type of gameplay. Yes, in that game you will sometimes go back in time and change things in order to change the present. However, there are enough differences between Trigger and Shadow that make me want to qualify the latter as original. The primary difference involves the timer in the top right of the screen. At the beginning of each of the game's chapters, you are tasked with trying to effect change in the present within a set amount of time. Even when you travel to the past, time will continue to flow in the present. This adds a thick layer of suspense to the game that Chrono Trigger never had. And I felt it. Every time I would speak to an NPC, the game would tell me that 15 or 30 seconds had passed by when really it was only 5 or 10 seconds. This might sound annoying, but it's really not. It's joyfully alarming. The game makes your impending doom suspenseful and fun, and time passing by faster than you expect engenders a unique type of thrill that you just don't get from most games. Where most games will create suspense by making you use a weapon to fend off death, Shadow of Destiny shuns convention and makes time your greatest weapon, as well as your greatest enemy. The timer, the impending death, and lack of conventional weapons render Shadow's gameplay, in my mind, experimental. I will continue elaborating on this game's storytelling in a moment, but first, I need to give a quick shout out to this video's sponsor. This video is sponsored by The Ridge. Upgrade your wallet and keychain to something sleek, professional looking, and most importantly, compact. I switched to the Ridge wallet because I was tired of walking around looking like I was evading taxes or like I had some sort of growth. Get the best offer with link ridge.com/Derrat. That's ridge.com/Derrat. As I stated before, each chapter begins with Ike's death or some other tragedy, and we need to travel back in time in order to find some way to prevent these things from happening. While we do this, we are simultaneously trying to determine who is constantly trying to kill us and why. It isn't clear at first how we are supposed to figure this out, even though Ike literally could just look over his shoulder, but you know, video game logic. As the game progresses, however, and we interact with these various characters from these different time periods, Ike and the gamer start to get hints that all of these characters and subplots that seem random are actually connected to each other. Eventually, it dawns on us that by discovering that connection, we may uncover the killer's identity. Obviously, without spoiling anything, we discover who the killer is eventually and what their motive is. When this happens, everything that happened up until that point sort of aligns in our brains, like the planets in the sky. We understand why we traveled to these specific time periods, why this or that character did or said a specific thing, and why it's relevant to Ike. When this realization comes, you feel smart. And you also feel immense respect for the author of the story for making all these seemingly disparate story threads unite at the end. The quality of the payoff is so good that it makes you forgive the game's other shortcomings. And honestly, there are a lot of them. Compared to Konami's and many other developers' releases that year, the graphics are nowhere near as impressive, the music is forgettable, and the voice acting is atrociously bad.
Am I dead?
Bingo.
Who's there?
In fact, it's so bad, it makes the cast of Resident Evil 1 look like seasoned thespians in comparison. That's how bad it is. Even the creators realized how bad it was, which is why they changed the voice cast for the PSP version. A voice cast that, honestly, looks like the voice cast for every anime ever made. Seriously, Yuri Lowenthal and Laura Bailey to anime are like the Spice Girls in the 90s. They're everywhere. Having said that though, the quality of the game's story makes these issues, at worst, non-distracting and at best, endearing. Despite the story's greatness, I will admit that a game like Shadow of Destiny won't provide the same level of stimulating entertainment that the modern FPS or Battle Royale will. However, if you are a gamer that wants to experience a mostly original approach to game and narrative design, Shadow of Destiny will not only provide that, its charm will make it stick in your memory for decades to come, long after you've forgotten about games from yearly release franchises like Call of Duty or Assassin's Creed. Best of all, you can get through the game fairly quickly. Average time to complete, according to howlongtobeat.com, is 4 hours. If you want to play the game, I will leave a tutorial for emulation in the description box below. Now, I did promise that I would address the game's use of alchemy. Before I do that, I will warn that there is a slight spoiler regarding the origin of Charles Martinet's character. I promise that knowledge of the character's origin will not ruin your overall experience of the game, including the central mystery. Still, I understand that there are some people that will want to play the game knowing nothing at all, and that's fine. You have been warned. So, the game makes reference to two of the most famous alchemical concepts. One is the Philosopher's Stone, and the other is the homunculus. My guess as to why my viewers started fervently asking me to cover this game is because I did a series of analysis videos of an anime called Fullmetal Alchemist recently, and both those concepts feature prominently. Like with the anime, Shadow of Destiny not only makes clever use of those concepts, but does so in a way that is remarkably consistent with the alchemical doctrine. In regards to the homunculus, that is the name of the character who brings Ike back to life and gives him his time-traveling abilities. Everything about this character, their look, their personality, and abilities are consistent with the homunculus from alchemical doctrine, but unfortunately this isn't immediately obvious to those with a cursory knowledge. See, a homunculus is often understood as just a miniature human that is produced within an alchemical vessel. That or a gourd that is placed inside horse shit. No really, I'm not joking. But as I explained in my second Fullmetal Alchemist video, an alchemical concept like homunculus can be more than one thing. In the case of both FMA and Shadow of Destiny, the homunculus represents the alchemical god Mercurius. Like with everything in alchemy, Mercurius had a metaphysical and a material identity. Metaphysically, Mercurius was the soul of the world and the universe, what the alchemists would call the anima mundi. Materially, Mercurius is the void of space, the dark matter from which the universe was born, what the alchemists would call the prima materia. This is why Homunculus, aka Father, in Fullmetal Alchemist looks like a black ball of gas, at first. In alchemy, this black world soul, this prima materia, is the first ingredient one uses to create the Philosopher's Stone, the primary goal of every alchemist for its ability to give eternal life. Interestingly, Shadow of Destiny puts a unique spin on this alchemical idea. When traveling back in time to the late 1500s, Ike meets an alchemist named Wolfgang Wagner, or Wagner as the English cast pronounces it.
Wagner.
Unlike most alchemists, Wagner's goal isn't the Philosopher's Stone, but the homunculus. In order to create them, Wagner needs a Philosopher's Stone so he can extract the prima materia that it was created from within his alchemical vessel. Now there are a few pieces of evidence supporting my assertion that homunculus is Mercurius. First is the homunculus characters seeming androgyny. They have a female look, but a male voice.
I'm only trying to help you, certainly not murder you.
This is appropriate, because Mercurius was often described as hermaphroditic or androgynous. Second, Mercurius is seen as a shape-shifting trickster god, capable of doing equal amounts of moral and immoral deeds. Homunculus in Shadow demonstrates their contradictory morality by helping Ike constantly throughout the game. However, without spoilers, there are questionable deeds that are committed alongside these positive deeds. Now here's something that'll blow your mind. These contradictory aspects, male-female, good-evil, are represented in a very common alchemical symbol, one that is used to symbolize the prima materia of which Mercurius is one and the same. That symbol is the Ouroboros. Recall what I said about how the prima materia was the void of space from which the universe was created. Before the universe, all of life was contained within this invisible cosmic seed. This includes the opposites of male-female, good-evil, and life-death. This is why the snake remains alive despite simultaneously dying. All of this confirms to me that the homunculus character is the Mercurius of the alchemists. There, that's my unique contribution to a game that is over 2 decades old. Quickly, before I conclude, I want to ask all of you a quick question. Are you like me in that you see the educational value of video games? Would you like to see games like Nier Automata or Metal Gear taught in a philosophy class? How about Silent Hill and Persona in a psychology class? If so, please consider filling out this survey that I linked in the description box. It will take you 2 minutes maximum, I promise. All I'm trying to figure out is whether or not you have ever seen video games used in an academic setting, as well as what games you think should hypothetically be taught. I will be doing a video very soon compiling the results. Please make sure to give this video a like if you like the video. That will take you less than 2 seconds to do, and it helps me out a lot. Until next week, I want to remind you guys as always, stay yellow.